The human soldier Mark had never expected to be standing in front of an alien princess, much less having her father, a powerful alien warlord, looking at him with cold disdain. Mark had been assigned to this mission with no clue that his life would change forever. He had always been a simple man, fighting for survival. But when he first met the alien girl, he couldn't help but notice her beauty. Her radiant red skin, her glowing silver white hair, and her large, luminous eyes captivated him completely. It all started when he was stationed on the remote planet, tasked with patrolling the boundaries of human-controlled space. He didn't know much about the aliens, just that they were dangerous and powerful. When the alien girl, Lyra, had approached his post one evening, Mark never could have predicted what would happen next. She wasn't like the others. Her smile was warm, and her voice was soft as she asked him questions about Earth. Despite the heavy language barrier, they had somehow connected. Their conversations grew longer each day, and before he knew it, Mark found himself looking forward to seeing her. His thoughts wandered to her constantly, even though he knew it was foolish. He was a soldier, and she was an alien princess. The consequences of their bond could be disastrous. One evening, as they sat together on a quiet hill, overlooking the alien city, Lyra suddenly turned serious. She gazed at him with an intensity he had never seen before. "I never expected you to be different, Mark," she said softly, almost as if she had read his mind. The words sent a chill down his spine, and he didn't know whether it was fear or excitement that he felt. Her hand reached out, brushing his, briefly before she pulled it back quickly. "But my father will never accept us," she said, her voice trembling. Mark's heart sank as he stared into her eyes. Her father, the ruthless warlord who ruled over their people, had always been a threat to human interests. Mark's role had always been clear. He was to keep the peace between their two worlds. But now it was becoming something more personal. "I don't care about what my father says," Lyra continued, her voice growing more determined. "I don't care about his laws. I care about you." Mark could hardly believe what he was hearing. Here, in this strange alien world, a princess was telling him that she cared for him, but there was no time to dwell on it. Suddenly, the sharp sound of footsteps echoed in the distance. Mark looked around, his instincts kicking in. He saw a group of alien soldiers approaching, their weapons drawn and ready. Lyra's face turned pale as she grabbed his arm. "You need to leave now," she urged, but it was too late. The soldiers had already spotted them. Lyra's father, the warlord himself, emerged from the shadows. He towered over the human soldiers. His eyes filled with anger as he saw his daughter standing beside one of the enemy. "This is an unforgivable act, Lyra," he boomed. "You've broken the peace between our worlds." Mark's heart raced as he tried to step forward, but one of the soldiers grabbed his arm and forced him to the ground. "You will pay the price for this," the warlord growled, his voice deep and menacing. Mark looked at Lyra, her face filled with sorrow as she tried to reach out to him, but it was too late. Her father had made his decision. In an instant, Mark was surrounded by armed alien soldiers. His thoughts were a blur as he struggled against their grip. Lyra's voice echoed in his mind. "I'm sorry," she whispered. But Mark didn't have time to react before they shoved him into a transport ship, bound for the alien army. As the ship lifted off, Mark stared out at the alien planet, his heart torn between the girl he had fallen for and the brutal reality of war. He had never signed up for this. But now there was no turning back. The war had just begun, and he was going to be a part of it. Mark sat in the cold, dark cell of the alien transport ship, his mind racing. He had never imagined his life would lead him to this moment, captured by the very species he had been trained to protect against. The thought of Lyra, her face full of regret and sorrow, haunted him. He had never wanted to hurt her, but now it seemed he had no choice. As the ship traveled through space, Mark's thoughts were a wind of confusion. What had Lyra meant by her apology? Why had her father sent him to the alien army? The warlord was known for his ruthless ways, and Mark knew that he was likely headed toward a fate worse than death. He had always been a soldier, but this was different. This was personal. When the ship landed on the alien world, Mark was roughly pulled from his seat and forced into a large, steel-walled room. He barely had time to process what was happening. Before alien soldiers surrounded him, their weapons raised in warning. One of them, a tall alien with red skin and sharp features, stepped forward and spoke in a deep, commanding voice. "You are now a prisoner of war, human. You will fight for us, or you will die." Mark tried to speak, to explain that he wasn't a soldier anymore, but the words caught in his throat. He had been trained for combat, but he had never fought for an alien army before. Still, he didn't have a choice. The soldiers grabbed him by the arms and dragged him down a long corridor, leading him to a massive arena filled with alien spectators. The sight of the arena was overwhelming. The walls were lined with holographic projections showing different battlefields and war zones. Mark's heart pounded as he realized what was expected of him. He was to fight, to survive in this arena, or perish at the hands of the alien forces. There was no escape. As they pushed him into the center of the arena, Mark caught a glimpse of Lyra standing at the edge, her eyes filled with a mixture of guilt and fear. She watched him, but it was clear she had no power to help him. The warlord, her father, stood beside her, his expression cold and indifferent. Mark's mind was clouded with anger and confusion. Why had she betrayed him like this? Why had she let him be sent to die? The alien soldiers shouted as the gates of the arena opened, releasing a massive, hulking creature into the arena. It was unlike anything Mark had ever seen. Its skin was like armored plating, its eyes glowing with a fierce, menacing light. The alien crowd roared with excitement, eager for the spectacle to begin. Mark took a deep breath, his training kicking in. He was a soldier, and no matter what, he wasn't going to die here. He reached for a weapon that had been placed at his feet, an energy blade with a glowing blue edge. His hands shook as he gripped it, but he didn't hesitate. The creature charged toward him with terrifying speed, its massive claws reaching out to strike. Mark barely dodged, rolling to the side as the creature's claws slammed into the ground where he had been standing. The battle was brutal. Mark's movements were fast, but the creature was faster, and its attacks were relentless. He was pushed to his limits as he fought for his life, but he knew he couldn't give up. He couldn't let them break him. His mind flashed back to Lyra's face, to the warmth in her eyes before everything had changed. Was this her father's doing, or had she truly wanted him here? As he finally managed to strike the creature down with a well-placed blow to its neck, the crowd erupted in applause. Mark stood, breathing heavily, covered in blood and sweat, but alive. He had won, for now, but the cost was clear. He was no longer free. He had been forced into this war, a pawn in the hands of an alien empire. The soldiers dragged the creature's body away, and Mark was left standing alone in the center of the arena. Lyra's face was still distant, her eyes betraying no emotion. But Mark knew that whatever had happened between them, it was far from over. The battle had just begun. Mark woke up in a cold, dimly lit room, the harsh sound of metal doors clanging shut echoing in his ears. The alien soldiers had given him a small cot to sleep on, but he couldn't find rest in a place like this. His body was sore from the battle in the arena, and his mind was clouded with thoughts of Lyra. He didn't know if he could trust her anymore, but the memory of her face haunted him. He sat up, staring at the walls of his prison cell. There was no way out. He had been taken from his home and thrown into a war he didn't understand, forced to fight for an alien empire. The soldiers had made it clear that he was now their property, and his life was no longer his own. They would train him, break him, and use him for whatever purpose they saw fit. Hours later, the door to his cell opened, and two alien soldiers stepped inside. One of them, a hulking creature with red skin and sharp features, held a weapon in his hand, while the other, a smaller but equally menacing figure, motioned for Mark to stand. "Time for your training," the larger one growled. Mark had no choice but to comply. Rising to his feet as the soldiers marched him out of the room, they led him down a long corridor, past other prisoners, each one wearing the same defeated expression. Mark felt a sense of dread settle in his stomach as he was pushed into a large, open arena. This was where the real training would begin. The alien soldiers watched from the sidelines, their eyes cold and calculating. The training was brutal from the start. Mark was forced to fight against other prisoners, each battle more vicious than the last. The creatures he faced were strong, fast and relentless, but Mark refused to go down without a fight. Each time he was knocked to the ground, he rose again, determined to prove that he was not just some helpless human. He was a soldier, and he would not be broken. Days turned into weeks as the training continued. Mark was pushed beyond his limits, forced to endure physical and mental torture. Every move he made was scrutinized by the alien trainers, and every mistake was punished. The harsh conditions were meant to break him, but Mark's resolve remained unshaken. His thoughts never strayed far from Lyra, but now they were filled with anger. Why had she betrayed him? Why had she let her father send him to this place? One day, after a particularly grueling training session, Mark found himself alone in the cell once again. His body ached, his clothes were torn, and his spirit was beginning to crack. The constant battles, the endless days of training, were taking their toll. He had never felt so powerless, so far from home. But as he sat on the cot, trying to catch his breath, a thought crossed his mind. Was this really the life he was going to live now? The door to his cell opened, and a familiar voice echoed in the darkness. "Mark," it called softly. He looked up to see Lyra standing in the doorway, her expression filled with sadness and regret. She stepped inside, her eyes not meeting his as she spoke. "I didn't want this for you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But my father doesn't care. He's using you as a tool in his war." Mark's heart raced as he stood up, anger flashing in his eyes. "Why didn't you stop him?" he demanded. "Why did you let him do this to me?" Lyra flinched at his words, but she didn't back away. She took a deep breath, her gaze steady. "I tried," she said quietly, "but my father's power is too great. I couldn't defy him. I thought I could protect you, but I was wrong." She looked up at him now, her eyes full of guilt. "I'm sorry, Mark. I never meant for this to happen." Mark's anger flared again, but it was quickly replaced by a wave of exhaustion. He had fought for so long, but now he was just tired. Tired of fighting, tired of being betrayed, tired of being trapped in a war that wasn't his. "I don't want this, Lyra," he said, his voice hoarse. "I never wanted any of this." Lyra took a step closer, her hand reaching out toward him. "I can't promise you anything," she said softly, "but I'll do what I can to help you. You're not alone, Mark. You never were." Mark stared at her for a long moment, his thoughts a tangled mess. He wanted to believe her, wanted to trust her again, but the weight of everything that had happened was too much to bear. He had been thrown into a war he didn't understand, and now he wasn't sure where to go from here. The silence between them stretched on, and Mark finally spoke. "I'm not going to stay here," he said, his voice firm. "I'll find a way out. I'll fight my way out, no matter what it takes." Lyra nodded, a faint hope flickering in her eyes. "Then I'll help you," she promised, and for the first time since his arrival on this alien world, Mark felt a spark of determination. Deep within him, he would survive. And he would make sure he wasn't alone in this fight. The days passed, each one blurring into the next. Mark's body had grown accustomed to the brutal training, but his mind was a different story. The memories of his life before this nightmare of Earth, of his simple existence, felt like distant dreams. His bond with Lyra lingered in the back of his mind, but trust was hard to come by now. She had betrayed him, and her father, the warlord, was the one who held the key to Mark's fate. Still, something in him refused to break. Each day Mark trained harder, growing stronger, faster, and more resilient. He wasn't just surviving now. He was adapting to the cruel world he had been thrust into. Every battle he fought in the arena was a test, a chance to prove not just to the aliens, but to himself that he would not be a pawn in their game. The arena, where he had been forced to fight other prisoners, was now his training ground. He faced creatures of all sizes and strengths, but nothing was more dangerous than the alien soldiers watching from the sidelines. They were always analyzing him, studying his every move, and looking for ways to break his will. Mark had learned to ignore their eyes, to focus solely on his next move. He was becoming something else in this place. A fighter, a survivor, a soldier. But deep down, a burning desire for freedom kept him going. Mark had heard whispers from other prisoners, rumors of an escape route, a way out of this hellish place. It wasn't much, but it was enough to fuel his hope. Every night, as he lay on the cot in his cell, Mark pictured what his life would look like if he could escape. He could return to Earth, to everything he had left behind. Lyra, though, remained a question mark. Could he forgive her for her betrayal? Could he even trust her again? The plan to escape came together one fateful night. Mark had been spending more time in the arena, defeating opponents and earning the favor of the alien soldiers. The more he fought, the more he gained their trust, but he also noticed the cracks in their defenses. Their overconfidence was his advantage. Late one night, Mark was summoned to a different part of the facility for a special assignment. He was told to meet with a group of high-ranking alien officials who wanted to see him fight for their entertainment. It wasn't uncommon, but this time felt different. The tone of the guards was strange, and their eyes held a coldness that made Mark uneasy. When he arrived at the designated area, Mark was surprised to find Lyra standing there. Her usual aloofness was replaced by a hint of urgency. She looked him over quickly before speaking in a low voice. "You have to leave now." "Mark," she whispered, "I've arranged everything. The escape route is ready. We don't have much time." Mark stared at her in disbelief. "Why help me now?" he asked, his voice filled with a mix of confusion and anger. "After everything that happened, why should I trust you?" Lyra's expression softened, and she stepped closer. "I'm sorry for what my father did to you, but this war, it isn't what I want. I never wanted you to be a part of it, and I can't watch you die here. Please trust me. I've made a deal with the soldiers to get you out." Mark's heart pounded in his chest. He wanted to believe her, but everything in him screamed that he shouldn't. Yet, in that moment, he realized that this was his only chance. If he stayed, he would die. There was no other option. "Okay," he said, his voice steady. "I'll trust you. But if this is a trap, I'll make sure you regret it." Lyra nodded quickly, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. She led him through a maze of hallways, each one colder and darker than the last. The farther they moved from the main compound, the more tense Mark became. He knew the risk they were taking. Any wrong move could end in disaster. Finally, they reached a hidden door at the farthest end of the facility. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was their ticket out. Lyra tapped in a sequence of codes, and the door slid open, revealing a dimly lit tunnel beyond. Mark's heart raced as he stepped forward, his mind still processing everything that had led to this moment. As they moved through the tunnel, Mark couldn't help but wonder what the future held. If they made it out, where would they go? How could he ever trust Lyra fully again? But for now, none of that mattered. They had to keep moving, keep pushing forward, or risk being caught. They reached the end of the tunnel and emerged into the open air, the night sky stretching out before them. It was quiet, eerily so, as if the entire world was holding its breath. The escape wasn't over yet. They still had to make it through the heavily guarded outer perimeter. But Mark felt a flicker of hope for the first time since his arrival. On this alien world, He was free, and he would fight to stay that way. The escape was not over. Mark could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he and Lyra moved through the alien compound. The night was dark, but the stars above felt like a distant hope, a reminder that there was still a world beyond this prison. They had managed to slip past the guards unnoticed, but they weren't out of danger yet. The perimeter was heavily guarded, and every step they took brought them closer to being caught. As they crept through the shadows, Mark's mind raced. He couldn't stop thinking about the war, about Lyra's father and the destruction he had caused. The alien warlord was a force to be reckoned with, and Mark had no illusions about the consequences of defying him. Yet, despite everything, a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that he was doing the right thing. He wasn't meant to be a soldier in someone else's war. He was a human, and he deserved to live on his own terms. Lyra's breathing was steady beside him, but Mark could tell she was just as tense. She glanced over at him, her eyes full of uncertainty. "We can make it," she whispered. "We just have to keep going." Mark nodded but said nothing. The weight of the moment hung heavy on him. There were so many questions about Lyra's loyalty, about the future, about the war, but there was no time to think about them now. All he had was this moment, this fragile chance to escape. They reached the outer wall of the compound, a towering structure that loomed over them like an insurmountable obstacle. Mark examined the wall carefully, his eyes scanning for any weaknesses. There was a small opening at the base, just big enough for them to crawl through. He motioned for Lyra to follow, and together they made their way toward the gap. As Mark crawled through, he could feel the ground beneath him growing colder. He barely fit through the space, but he pushed forward, his body scraping against the sharp edges of the wall. His mind remained focused, the sound of his breath echoing in his ears. Finally, he emerged on the other side, his body covered in dirt and grime, but free. Lyra followed closely behind, her face pale but determined. "We're almost there," she said, but Mark could hear the doubt in her voice. They were close to the outer boundary, but they still had to make it past the final security measures. The alien army was relentless, and they would stop at nothing to catch them. Mark glanced over at her, his eyes meeting hers. "Lyra," he said quietly, "if we get out of here, what then? What happens after?" Lyra hesitated, her gaze shifting to the ground. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I know we can't go back. I can't go back to my father, to that life. I've chosen this path now, no matter where it leads." Mark felt a mix of emotions. As he stared at her, he wanted to believe her, wanted to trust her, but the past few weeks had been a whirlwind of confusion and betrayal. Could he really forgive her for sending him to fight in that arena? Could he forget the pain of being used as a pawn in a war he didn't understand? They moved forward cautiously, the tension between them thick in the air. The final security checkpoint was in sight, a tall, imposing gate that marked the boundary between the alien compound and the outside world. They could see the alien guards stationed around it, their weapons drawn and ready. Mark and Lyra exchanged a glance. This was it. If they were caught now, there would be no escape, but they had come too far to turn back. They had no choice but to press forward and hope that they could make it through unnoticed. Lyra turned to Mark, her face serious. "When we reach the gate, we run. We don't stop no matter what. Do you understand?" Mark nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it. This was their last chance. Together, they sprinted toward the gate, a sound of their footsteps echoing in the quiet night. The guards noticed them just as they reached the gate. But it was too late. They were already halfway through, and the gate was opening, just as they had planned. Mark's mind raced as they passed through the gate, but he couldn't look back now. They had made it. The alien compound was behind them, and freedom was ahead. As they ran, Mark realized that this was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment where he could finally choose his own fate, the moment where he could leave behind the war and the destruction and find a new path. But as they reached the end of the compound and looked toward the unknown, Mark knew that whatever happened next, he couldn't do it alone. Lyra had helped him escape, and he owed her that much. Now, it was time to figure out where their journey would lead. Together. Mark and Lyra stood at the edge of the alien compound, the cold night air biting at their skin. They had made it out, but the journey wasn't over yet. Ahead of them stretched a barren landscape, unfamiliar and daunting, but it was freedom. The compound was behind them, and with each step, the weight of the war and betrayal began to lift. Lyra walked beside him, her face determined yet filled with uncertainty. She had chosen this path, but now that they were free, Mark could see the doubt in her eyes. It wasn't just about escaping anymore. It was about what came next. Where do we go now? Mark asked, his voice steady but filled with the questions that had been haunting him for so long. They had no plan, no map to guide them, just the open wilderness and the endless unknown. Lyra looked at him, her brow furrowed as she thought. "We go wherever we can make a life," she said quietly. "Away from the war, away from my father. I don't care about the empire anymore, Mark. I just want to live." Mark nodded, but doubt lingered in his chest. Could he trust her? Could he trust anyone after everything that had happened? The warlord was still out there, and the consequences of defying him were far from clear. Yet, as he looked at Lyra, he realized that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't the only one who had been trapped by forces beyond their control. As they began walking, the landscape slowly shifted. The barren land began to give way to rugged hills and rocky terrain. It wasn't much, but it felt like a new beginning, something neither of them had expected to find after everything they had been through. The silence between them was heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence of understanding, of two people who had been through something no one else could understand. They were both soldiers in different ways, both survivors of a war that wasn't their own. Mark had always been trained to fight, to follow orders, to put his duty above everything else. But now, standing in this alien world, he realized that everything he had known was no longer true. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a man who had to decide what kind of life he wanted to live. And for the first time, he felt like he could choose. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of unfamiliar plants. Lyra stopped for a moment, taking a deep breath. "It's beautiful here," she said softly. "I've never seen anything like it before." Mark looked around, his eyes scanning the horizon. The landscape was strange, but there was a quiet beauty to it. It wasn't Earth, and it would never be. But for a moment, it didn't matter. What mattered now was that they were free to decide their future, free to leave the past behind. As they continued their journey, Mark found himself thinking about his old life. Earth, his friends, his family. He had left it all behind when he had become a soldier, and now he didn't know what had happened to any of it. The war had taken everything, and now it felt like there was nothing left. But in the distance, Mark saw something that caught his attention. A small settlement, barely visible against the backdrop of the hills. His heart skipped a beat as he realized that it might be the start of something new. A place where they could hide, where they could rebuild. Lyra saw the change in his expression and followed his gaze. "Is that what I think it is?" she asked, her voice filled with hope. "It looks like a village," Mark said, his voice filled with cautious optimism. "We'll find out soon enough." They quickened their pace, moving toward the settlement. As they approached, Mark couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. This could be their chance, their opportunity to start over. But there was a lingering question in his mind. Would the people here accept them, or would they be seen as enemies? As they reached the outskirts of the village, Mark could see figures moving in the distance. His heart raced, unsure of what they would find. But when they stepped into the village, they were met with surprised but curious gazes. The people here were different, alien. Yes, but not hostile. They didn't look like soldiers or warriors. They looked like normal people, just trying to survive in a harsh world. The village leader, an older alien woman, stepped forward, her eyes scanning them carefully. "You're not from here," she said, her voice calm but firm. "What brings you to our village?" Lyra stepped forward, her voice steady. "We're refugees," she said. "We come from a place of war, and we seek refuge." The woman studied them for a long moment before nodding. "You're welcome here," she said. Simply, "This village is a place for those who have nowhere else to go. We offer shelter, food, and a chance to rebuild." Mark's heart swelled with relief. This was it. This was the beginning of the life they had both been searching for. They were no longer prisoners, no longer part of a war that didn't belong to them. They were free, and they had found a place to call home. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the village, Mark realized that he had made it through. The past was behind him, and the future was waiting.